So let's start with, I would say, the science, if you will, behind Kolbe and the Kolbe assessment, really rooted within three different parts of the mind. What are these parts of the mind to be aware of?
Yeah, so there are three parts of your mind. You have your cognitive side, and that is your intellect, your skills, your reasoning. Then you have your affective side, and that's your motivations, your desires, and your personality. And both of those are very important parts of the mind. But your cognitive and your affective parts of your mind, those alone, your skills and your motivation, those alone are not enough to predict success. And so there's this missing piece of the mind that is not often talked about, and that is your conative side of your mind, and that is your doing. That is simply how you are going to get things done. So when you remove your skills and you remove your desires, your motivations, it's how are you naturally going to take action? And this is innate. This is something that you're hardwired, and so it is going to stand the test of time. This is natural, and so it's how you make decisions and solve problems. And so I think it's so important to understand that, because when we're operating on just our intellect or just our motivations, we can't rely on that for success.
And when you're talking about this is how you act, this is how you do, this is, and when you think about what you do, you're either going to take some action, you're going to solve a problem, which is one of the reasons that have built Kolbe into our methodology here, because we have the four environments, the four seasons for exponential growth, where an individual can be learning, they can be thinking based upon what they've learned of how to apply that knowledge to then go on and do, to then create some space and time to pause, review, and reflect. And so when we look at those three different parts of the mind, you're right. The conative part of the mind is not very well known, at least for the vertical that we're working in within financial services.
Right.
You look at the other two parts, and you can test knowledge with IQ, you can test personality with like DISC and Myers-Briggs, and that begs the question: why invest time to look into the conative part of the mind? Because like you said, this is
Yep.
innate.
It is. And so the conative part of the mind is all about your mental energy and protecting your mental energy. And so it's so important to understand that. So a really great example that I have personally is I was a teacher for many, many years, and I was great at it. So my skill, my cognitive side, I had the intellect to perform well, and my affective side, I liked it. I was motivated. But over time, I was very, very drained. I was exhausted, and I could not understand why. Here I am in a job that I'm great at, that I love, but yet something isn't right. And I felt drained every single day. And so understanding that the job requirements that being a teacher required, it forced me to work outside of my natural operating mode. So it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It wasn't that I didn't like it, but I was being forced to perform and to take action in ways that were not natural for me. So it drained my energy. So it's really important to understand that. And I think for a lot of us, for me, it hurt my confidence level. I felt like there was something wrong with me. Well, why is this not working out for me? I felt like I was failing at something. But once I realized it had nothing to do with my skills, it had nothing to do with my personality or my motivation. It had everything to do with just the way I naturally operate. It was such a gift to be given. And so I think this missing piece is almost the most important piece of the puzzle to look at.
That idea of a gift, and we have gifted so many leaders with the gift of
Yeah.
Kolbe, to help them understand and know themselves better of how they take action. I think even with my own personal story, it was 2017 whenever I took my Kolbe assessment, and I was dealing with a lot of things. There was a lot of conflict, and it was because I was working outside of the way that I would naturally take action. Whenever I figured out how I do take action naturally from an energetic standpoint, and I do it by just doing what we're doing now. It's quick starting, to
Yes.
use the
Yep.
Kolbe perspective. I can do podcast all day. Yesterday, you talked about being in New Orleans recently. I was in New Orleans yesterday, as of this recording, and went for 5 or 6 hours with kind of a very light agenda, but it was just so much quick start energy needed that whenever I came home to 4 kids, I was just perfectly fine.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of the spectrum, though, please, please don't ask me to follow through with something. And I think that's one of the things with Kolbe. It gave me the awareness that I can do that follow through work or that fact finding work, but I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be drained. I'm going to probably even be just a little bit grumpy.
Exactly.
And that's where I want to come back to this idea of energy,
Yeah.
psychological energy, if
Yep.
you will, because that psychological energy then transmutes into physical energy. What do you mean by this?
Yeah. So if you think about when you're working outside of your natural operating mode, so for example, for me, I am very systematic and I follow processes. I create a plan. I have my checklist. I naturally bring closure to things. Those are the things that give me energy. I'll never forget right after I read one of the new traction books, Process, I went through and I did a review of all of our internal processes. And James Robert, I think I told you this too. I sat there for probably 4 or 5 hours and went through line by line and edited and created all these internal processes. And I'm telling you, the time went by.
You're exhausting me. You're exhausting me.
Right, just talking about it, you're done. But it felt like 20 minutes. I was in such a flow state because
Yeah.
that is where I naturally get my energy. That is where I lead the charge. But on the flip side, if you throw something at me last minute, or you ask me to work up or if I accidentally work up into the deadline, it is going to exhaust me. And a perfect example when this, but in just full transparency, I was nominated for a Kolbe Professional Award and I procrastinated. I had a lot of things on my plate. I waited to the last minute, partly because I didn't give myself time to make a plan and make a system on how I was going to tackle that application. I waited to the deadline. I literally turned it in the day it was due. I worked until 10, 11 o'clock at night. And the very next day, now I turned it in. It was on time. It was done well. It was good, but I was exhausted. I think you and I met like midday through the next day. And I said, I'm spent.
Yes.
And you go, stop for the day, take the rest of the day, rest your mind. And so that just shows how when you're working outside of your strengths, while you can do it, I completed the application. I hopefully did a great job, but it took a lot of energy from me.
Well, I want to pause on this point for just a bit because I remember when you were going through and I said, listen, let's have a conversation about this before you submitted. And almost kind of did a very informal, we probably should have just recorded it because it would have been a great podcast. But
Sure.
But what I think was happening is I know how I initiate action, and I was quick starting because I don't really need a playbook. I'm just going to solve problems and I'm just going to do it, and that's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And what I was doing is I was able to use my quick start energy to give you more clarity, to give you some perspective that you could
To
then
give
go
me the playbook.
exactly to then go away. And I think when I think about our relationship, it's I make a lot of things up, then you make it real, and then you go look, how can we make this repeat? And that was something that I learned from my time in strategic coach with Dan Sullivan. You make it up, you make it real, you make it repeat. But Kolbe does play a big role in this here, particularly when it comes to making sure that you have the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about, the way we differ from our ways of taking action and how, like, for example, on the application, you naturally jumped in and not a problem. I called you up right away and you got started, whereas I needed more of that playbook. And I think back to before I knew my Kolbe, when I first came back for tour number 2, I kind of felt this need to almost mirror your strengths. You're very innovative. You have ideas left and right. And so I kept thinking, well, that's not me. I'm not coming up with all these ideas. In fact, I'm actually questioning a lot of your ideas. I'm pushing back a lot.
Mm,
And I'll never forget one day, a few months in, I, pulled you aside and I said, "Hey, I just want you to know I'm not being negative whenever I question or probe or poke holes in your ideas." And of course, I was always doing it very respectfully.
sure.
And you told me, no, 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 I understand. I appreciate that. But it wasn't until I got my Kolbe results that I realized, wait a minute, my strength here isn't to innovate. That's James Roberts. My strength here is to be protective. It is to mitigate risk. So really, I am bringing value because I'm asking those questions. And for me, that was a major moment in my self-confidence, and it really empowered me then to feel comfortable with what I'm bringing to the table. No, I'm not generating all these ideas left and right, but I am still bringing value to the organization by being a little bit more protective.
It's interesting that you note that, because if I think back to when you were around for tour number one, coming right out of college, and I didn't have the self awareness that I had that I have now, back then as a leader, I was extremely unaware. And what was happening, and we're going to come back to this point, but I just want to plant the seed now. I was I was hiring people that were like me. I was hiring a bunch of quick starts, and we were extremely light on the follow through of system building and repetition. Like you said, you come back after you read Process from the Traction series. You got a ton of energy going to look at
Mhm.
systems and processes line by line. And I'm like, no way! Like I can do it, and that's the thing. I think that's the most important thing when you understand your Kolbe profile.
Right.
You can work outside of the way that you naturally take action, but once
Sure.
again, it's going to drain you. It's going to exhaust you, and it's through Kolbe that I have gained not just awareness in myself or you, but also with the financial brands that we
Yeah.
are coaching and guiding and
Yeah.
advising.